Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, when somebody dies or like just the loss of someone in their life, they think, oh, she's fine, she's so little, she's not going to remember. But not only will the loss affect you in the moment, grief sticks with you for the rest of your life. As I got older, I always said I want children to be in California. I want children everywhere to be able to experience something like Camp Good Grief. So I actually wrote a workbook called Lemons to Lemonade on Amazon that encompasses a lot of the values that Camp Good Grief talks about, and I put them into my book because they really helped me.
I'm Kevin Lee, President and CEO of Mid-America Transplant, and we are honored to sponsor this episode of Grief is Real, Big, Better Shared. At Mid-America Transplant, we have the privilege of working with families across southern Missouri and northeast Arkansas who make the heroic decision to donate their loved ones' organs or tissues. While donation often brings families comfort, they are still heartbroken by their loss. We are driven by compassion for these families and continue to walk with them through their grief journey. Mid-America Transplant provides several programs to help families memorialize their loved one, but we believe that some of the best support can be provided by a grief center. We are proud to work with the Center for Good Grief and appreciate everything they are doing in the region to bring healing to people who are coping with loss. Mid-America Transplant is inspired by life and by the donor families who give transplant patients a second chance at life. For more information about being a donor, visit sayyesgivelife.org.
Today's episode is another special one for me. I absolutely love talking with former clients and campers. I love just catching up with them and hearing about life and what they're doing. I also love hearing about the ways they are continuing to work on their grief and the ways that many of them continue to share their grief with others. Today's guest is an incredible example of someone who has continued to grieve and mourn well in her own life, but also she's done an incredible job sharing her grief with so many other grievers in her community. So welcome, Sophia. Thank you for being here with me today.
Hi, I'm so excited to be on today. Thank you so much for having me.
Sophia, obviously I know you very well, but I wondered if you would just sort of start by introducing yourself to our listeners and a little bit about what brought you to the Baptist Centers for Good Grief and how you and I met the first time.
Yes, of course. So unfortunately, I lost my dad suddenly at age 5 to a heart attack. And I was very fortunate that my family, my mom, was able to find the Center of Good Grief. And after some time, I met Angela, and she helped me with my grieving process. And obviously, as someone so young, it was hard for me to understand and process all of that. So the Center for Good Grief really helped me understand grief and the importance of moving through it.
So you were 5 when your dad died, and how old are you now?
I'm 15.
So for our listeners, yes. So I love that you're so willing to come today and talk. I think it will be very helpful for other teenagers to hear from you, but also other parents and caregivers to hear from you, because a question we get so much is, will my child be okay? How will they be okay? Will they really be okay when they're a teenager? In fact, I'm pretty sure your mom and I had these conversations as well. So thank you so much for just your vulnerability and your willingness to share. I'm wondering if we could start with kind of what you remember, like what was it like as that grieving 5-year-old?
I just remember it was so sudden. My dad was out of town actually, so I just remember like chaos kind of erupting in my house early in the morning. And I just remember a lot of chit chat back and forth between my mom and the hospital and all of my dad's family. And I just remember being so stressed just because I was so close to my dad, and my dad was such a big part of my life, and he still is. And I just kind of remember, it was all kind of a blur just because traumatic incidents, I kind of blur them out. But I do remember like a lot of our good friends and family came over that day, and people who lived out of state flew in to comfort us. But as someone so young, it was just so stressful and a really hard thing to process for a little girl.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you remember hearing your dad died, like hearing that sentence and figuring out what that actually meant?
I just remember when it happened, like when they finally called it off, I just remember I was sitting on the couch upstairs with my nanny, and my mom had run up the stairs screaming, "He's gone, he's gone, he's dead." And I just remember the look on my mom and my nanny's face was like crazy, like just white, and everyone was crying. And obviously I started crying because I was like, he's gone. I didn't completely understand at the time, but it was super traumatic. And when I was told that I would never see him again, it was really hard for me to process and understand.
Absolutely. Do you remember like those first nights and days? Like, can you remember what you did, just kind of getting through the days and routines?
Yes, somewhat. I remember that, again, we were surrounded by a lot of friends and family. So some of our friends who live in Memphis came over to our house and stayed with us. A lot of people brought us meals. My family from California, where I live now, had flown in. Lots of people were over, and they were planning the funeral. And then quite quickly after the funeral happened, when everybody was still in town. And I just remember the house feeling really empty and weird, and just knowing that I wasn't going to be able to see my dad again was really hard, because obviously living in the house with him, all of his stuff is there, and every turn you take, there's just stuff of his, like whether it's clothes or pictures or wallets, etc.
I appreciate your honesty, and I really wanted to start here for a reason, Sophia, because so many people think that 5-year-olds don't grieve. They think that 5-year-olds don't understand. And I really wanted to start here so that people could hear you as a 15-year-old really be able to say what a 5-year-old remembers. And you remembered the looks, you remembered the words, you remembered the people showing up, people bringing food. But also I heard in there that you remembered how just different the house felt. And I appreciate how you were able to talk about your dad's things, but then also his presence missing. And I think that's really important for people to understand that a 5-year-old can feel those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, when somebody dies, or like just the loss of someone in their life, they think, oh, she's fine, she's so little, she's not going to remember. But not only will the loss affect you in the moment, grief sticks with you for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. It traveled with you to California, didn't it?
It did.
Tell us, with what you're comfortable, tell us about your dad. Help us to get to know him, because I know from you, he had a large presence in the world.
I think that most people around Memphis knew my dad. He was a regular at Houston's, and he was always so nice. He was nice to everybody. His presence was so warm. He was sweet and polite, and he really just lit up a room. And I just, he was so sweet, and that's just kind of how I remember him. And he was always willing to do things with me, and always showed how much he cared for me and spent so much time with me. And he really was just a great friend and husband, dad, and son.
What wonderful things to be said about a dad. And you two had a special bond, yeah, a friendship. But, I just know from our time together, I learned he loved being with you, and just in the simple things and in the big things.
Yeah, he definitely did. He used to carry photos of me in his wallet, and he would show everybody like the most recent photos of me. So he was a really big part of my life, and he still is. But we definitely had a super strong relationship.
How do you feel that relationship, that you've been able to carry that with you now 10 years to a 15-year-old?
Right. So obviously, I think a lot of people think like when a loved one passes away, they're just gone forever. But I think as you move through grief, there's so many things you can do to stay connected to your loved one. They're not just gone from your life like forever. Like, for example, when at Camp Good Grief, when we made memory boxes and goodbye balloons, like you're still tied to your loved one no matter what happens to them. Today, we still have so many photos of him in my room, in our house. And I actually have a blanket that was made for me with like all of his clothes and his ties on it. It's like a quilt. So he's definitely still a very big part of my life. And even though he's not here physically with me, I carry him with me every day. And I just want to, impress him and make him proud.
How are you like him?
So I've been told that I'm a lot like him. So I look a lot like him, except I have brown eyes and he had blue eyes. For starters, I know that he was super funny and sweet, and I try my best to be funny and sweet too. So it's really interesting because even people who I haven't seen in so long that I talk to on the phone, or they see pictures of me, or they know about me, everybody says how I'm just like my dad. And that's a very big compliment because I know how well liked he was. Even if he wasn't the biggest fan of someone, I think he was always nice to everyone, and I think that's such a great quality to have.
Gosh, it certainly is, especially in today's world where people are so divided for so many things, and to be able to be a real friend, to look past those things and just, come back to kindness. I think that says a lot for sure. I wondered if we could talk about, kind of going back to school after your dad died. Then, as the 5-year-old, do you remember kind of going back or being around people who kind of knew, or how did they respond to you?
Yes, I do remember. For starters, my teachers at the time, because I had two in the same classroom, I was in junior kindergarten, and they came to his funeral. I do remember that. And when I came back to school on the first day, everyone gave me a photo of me and my dad, and it's framed, and everybody signed it. And I still have it. It's in the pantry. And I just remember everybody being super understanding and kind, and everyone at that school was so sweet to me. And I was lucky enough, even as a little girl, to have friends who said, I'm here for you. I don't understand what you're going through necessarily, but I think everyone just wanted to give me a hug and be there for me, which I really appreciated.
Did you feel different?
Moving through school, even today, is a challenge for me because in general life, everybody has their mom and their dad to get them from school, take them to dinner, take them to events, take them to different places. And it's hard because I have my mom, which is amazing, but I think it still hurts knowing that I can't call my dad to come pick me up if my mom can't get me, or I can't go somewhere because I don't have my dad to drive me. Mm-hmm. Or I actually never had any of these at my school, but like daddy-daughter dances would be catastrophic for me. Like just things like that really hurt because it just reminds you that they're not with you physically.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why I wanted to ask you that and talk about this for a little bit, because we do so much work to help, teachers, educators, schools know how to respond to children who are grieving, but also families as well. I mean, hopefully many people who listen to this are people who are supporting, young children through grief. And so to hear that is so important. I get that question a lot from schools. We have a child coming back. What should we do? Should we do something? Should we say something? Or should we just pretend it didn't happen? And, my response is always, know the child first, but don't pretend it didn't because it did happen and it's huge and this child is coming back. So you would say that was a comforting thing that they acknowledged that your father died, they had a gift for you, and also just sounds like told you they were there to support you.
Yes, I think the last thing that you would want to do is pretend the loss didn't happen because it's so significant in your life and the child has to move through their life without whoever their loved one is. And I think the best thing that teachers could do is just obviously not dig at the loss, but just tell the child, like, I'm here for you. I know what you're going through is so hard, and just to kind of understand and be there and just comfort them through the hard time they're through, because the last thing you want to do is ignore your grief, because if you just bottle it up inside you, it's not going to end well. And you just have to move through grief and do as many strategies as you can that work for you, but the last thing I would do would be to ignore it.
Yeah. And then moving to California, starting a new school, did you find that that was a time you kind of had to start again about and explain my dad died to new friends?
Yes, I did. I mean, even today, like, I have new friends and they come to my house and I'm like, oh yeah, my dad is not alive. So it's definitely a struggle. But I think, again, like, whenever you say that, everyone is just understanding. And for the most part, I mean, I would hope no one would mock you or make fun of you, which has never happened to me. But again, it was a change. And even moving to Southern California, I asked my mom, like, am I going to be able to go to something like Camp Good Grief? Where's the Center for Good Grief? Because that was such a huge thing for me during this time of my life. And I had to go to a new counselor, but it was so much different. I just sat in her office and talked to her, which I don't believe is the best way for a child to cope. I think the best way for a child to cope is through creative outlets. And as I got older, I always said I want children to be in California. I want children everywhere to be able to experience something like Camp Good Grief. So I actually wrote a workbook called Lemons to Lemonade on Amazon that encompasses a lot of the values that Camp Good Grief talks about, and I put them into my book because they really helped me and saved me from enduring this grief. And from that, I created a kind of mini Camp Good Grief, the Lemons to Lemonade camp, just off of that, because grief is such a big thing, and I think that kids need to express their grief through creative outlets. And if you're able to go to the Center for Good Grief, you really are just so lucky, because so many people can't access that.
I wish everyone could see my face, because I feel like my face is going to split from the smile. I'm so proud of you and the work that you've done, and we're going to talk about Lemons to Lemonade for sure, but it's so fascinating for me because I can remember sitting with you inside the Center for Good Grief and working on creative outlets, because I immediately knew when I met you, that's how you were going to express your grief, was through creative outlets. And you were just so hungry every time you came for opportunity. And I can remember when our hour was up, just this little bit of like disappointment of I'm not ready to go, but you knew it was time, and we would go out and we would tell your mom, and you sometimes had a message for me, what you wanted me to tell your mom. You were so active in your grief work. Do you remember how, like, the creative outlets, I know you talked about the things we did at camp, but that it sounds like that really did give you a space, maybe for when you didn't have the words?
Yes, I definitely think that is true. They really did help me cope, because I couldn't express really through words. I wasn't quite mature enough to do that. Like today, I still have so many of my crafts. I have a memory box. I have a little box that we painted, and I actually remember like the room where, like, I could walk into the room and show you where we sat. I have a little box, and like I just look at them on my desk every day, and I just remember how much, they helped me, and the conversations we had, because I actually struggled a lot with anxiety, and I just think all of that really helped me.
I also remember you being a very brave member of your family in terms of doing the grief work. And from my perspective, I'm curious if this is yours, I think you really also helped your family grieve, your mom and extended family, because you were so willing to do it. And you were so proud of the work you did. And I think through sharing it with them, it felt like you really were helping the family grieve. Do you share that perspective?
I would agree with that. I would like to agree with that. I think in life, like even today, I like to kind of like, I always want to make sure people are okay. Even if you just look sad, like I'm always going to go up to someone and say, hey, are you okay? And I like to lead things. I like to be involved in things. And I like to just kind of know what's going on. I've always been that way, even since, like you said, since I was 5 years old. So I think that like me showing my mom like I'm okay, look at what all this stuff I'm doing, it's so amazing, it's gonna be okay, we're gonna be fine, don't worry, we're gonna get through it. I do think like everything that I was taught at the Center for Good Grief, and also just my mentality in general, did help my family grieve. And it just shows you that even at 5 years old, like you understand so much and you want to help because you know this loss is so significant.
We actually say a lot of times that children are healthier than adults, because you haven't kind of been contaminated yet by all the made up rules in the world and society. And I think that that was a powerful thing. And I think that we're hearing that from you today, is that 5-year-old, you were aware of what was going on and you were feeling it and you saw all the changes it was bringing and the sorrow, and then that took you to Lemons to Lemonade. So let's talk about your journal that you wrote and tell me about the process. How did you get there?
Yeah, so ever since I moved here, I always asked my mom, where's Center for Good Grief? I want Center for Good Grief here, because nowhere. Like I did so much research in the past years trying to find somewhere like that, and there is one, but it's far. And I just think that everyone should have the opportunity to access accessible grieving resources, and that just wasn't a reality, especially for children. Like most children don't want to sit in a room and open up to you, and that's why Center for Good Grief is so amazing. So just kind of leading to why I wrote the book, I've always wanted to write the book. I've always wanted to really do the camp. And I was just talking with one of our family friends one day, and she was like, so what do you she was asking me about my dad and all this stuff, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to write the book. So I got started on the book about a year and a half ago, I would say. We got it done. We published it on Amazon. And then I applied to a grant at the Dragon Kim Foundation, which helps high schoolers create camps for people, especially in underserved areas. I got the grant with my friend who is in my grade. She lost her mom at a young age as well. And we've worked really hard to organize the camp, and we ran it June for the first time, and it was amazing. And I think like the most rewarding part of it was seeing kids say, no, I don't want to go home. This is so much fun. When am I going to see you again? And that was just so heartwarming for me to see kids come into camp so kind of with like a hood over their head almost, not wanting to share their feelings, to the end having these creative outlets allow them to express themselves and remember their loved one and hear all these stories about their loved one and their parents being so happy with everything. And it was just really amazing for me to see.
That is so amazing. And it's so hard to explain to people who have not experienced it, but how children can change so quickly at grief camp, because like you said, sometimes they do arrive and grief camp sounds like the worst thing in the whole world. Like, why would I want to go there? And I've had kids say to me so many times over the years, I don't want to go somewhere we're just going to sit and cry. And I'll say, well, if we do that, that sounds really awful. But when you hear grief camp, what else do you think you're going to do? And, but then you just start that process of being together in a unique community of grievers with some creative outlets, supportive people, and incredible things happen. And it sounds like that's what happened for you in June.
Yes, for sure. No, I totally understand what you mean, especially like some of the older kids. They came up and looked at me like I was crazy when they came up to check in. But towards the end, it was amazing because I think the Center for Good Grief inspired me to not just focus on the death of the loved one, but on the impact they left on your life and how amazing it was in the time that you had with them, because they're so special to you and you're so lucky to have spent the amount of time you did with them.
Absolutely. That's healthy grief and mourning. What you just said right there is like, you're still living your life. Sophia's life matters as well. And you're still living your best life, but you're bringing your grief with you. You're bringing your dad with you. And when we do that, that's when we have healthy grieving. And a lot of times people are looking for the ending point, or when are we over this? And it's like, no, it's about a merger. It's merging the two together forever. Like carrying your father with you forever. That's healthy. And it's so different than the way our culture thinks. We want kind of an ending point. And I think those are the people who struggle with their grief are the ones that are looking for that finality instead of learning about it being a merger.
Yeah, that's completely true. I mean, look, like I lost my dad 10 years ago and I'm still grieving. There are still some hard days where I wish he was here. But, in my book, like a really big quote is, you have to add a little bit of sugar to the lemon juice, which is the hard situation, to make lemonade. So, in these hard situations, they're not just going to go away, but you have to add strategies to the bad situation to make lemonade out of something that was sad. It's always going to be with you, and there's always going to be pain, but you can just make life a little bit sweeter by remembering how amazing the loved one was and the time you had with them.
Absolutely. You said adding the sugar, those are coping skills. What coping skills help you? Sounds like writing is something that helps you.
Yeah, okay. Riding books, yes, and actually riding horses too.
That's right, riding.
Yeah. So I'm actually in my riding clothes right now, so excuse that. But definitely like some things that have helped me grieve. Like the second my dad died, one of my dad's best friends is an avid equestrian and told my mom, you need to get her on a horse, which is probably my mom's biggest regret in some ways financially. But definitely like just finding a passion once you lose a loved one, to me, is so important, because you're just releasing all that stress. You can be in a completely different world, and I love it. And I've been so dedicated to that. And some other things that have helped me are definitely like journaling about my dad, or just looking at photos, or creating memory boxes with his stuff and just looking back at it whenever I'm having a hard day. I would say those are kind of my top things that have helped me.
And you mentioned the quilt earlier. I loved that with his clothes and ties. I have a quilt like that, and I love it. I mean, it's something I want on days when I'm feeling a little low, but also it's so cozy, and I'll see a different T-shirt and be reminded of a different memory, and so that's a nice thing to have as well.
Yeah, for sure. I love mine. It's so cozy, but also you're right. Like you just look at the different things and you think of so many different memories. I used to always tell my dad, "Oh, you should wear the pink. You should wear the pink one. Wear the pink shirt with the pink tie." So there's like a few of those on there, and I always just think of that, and that just brings me a little bit of joy if I'm ever having a rough day.
How would you describe your grief now as a 15-year-old, like how it shows up? I think that would be helpful for people to understand too, again, talking about how there's no ending point. But I imagine it looks and feels a lot different than it did at 5.
Right. So, I mean, as I said, it sounds scary, endless grief. That sounds not fun. But it's not a bad thing. You're always going to grieve, and it doesn't mean always laying in your bed, having depression. You have to move through it. So, of course, like, however long is going to be really difficult. But once you learn how to grieve and you move through it, which is so important because you don't just want to be stuck, moving through it is just so important. And today, that has allowed me to accomplish so many things and changed my mindset from, oh my gosh, I don't have a dad, to I want to make my dad proud and I want to live up to the expectations and the goals and the dreams he set for me. So yes, even though I lost my dad and it was very traumatic for me and it still is to this day, I'm okay. I'm happy. I'm a good student. I'm an athlete. I'm doing so many great things in life. And just because you lose a loved one that's really significant in your child's life does not mean that your life is over. You have so much to experience and things are going to be okay, which I think is what a lot of people don't think is true. You think, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? But if you just assist your child and just kind of accept the grief, you're going to be just fine.
We had our teen grief group this past week, and we focused on linking objects. So some of the things we were talking about, like the items in the quilt, or you mentioned wallets at the beginning, different items that are concrete type items that we can touch and see and hold to help link us. But when we have those linking objects and we think about that linking, it helps with continued bonds. So I'm hearing a lot of how you have continued that bond with your dad, and it sounds like linking objects are around you and you have those even in a photo, things like that. So we were talking about that in our teen group, and I was just sitting here thinking like, oh, you would have been excellent in that group this week. And they brought their linking objects to share and how meaningful they are. And I think that's something important for people to remember as well, that even on maybe a tough day, putting something small in your pocket that was theirs. I have somebody I used to work with who had her dad's driver's license, and she'd put it in her back pocket. And it's like, well, it's just there in case I need it. If I need to just touch it or just have something kind of physical that helps connect me back to him.
Yeah, I definitely think that's so important. I think like a big thing for me is stuffed animals. So my dad used to buy me so many stuffed animals, and I've marked all the ones that he bought me with like a heart on the tag. Like a few of my favorites, I have like this like long pink dog. I have a dog that is like it's like a bloodhound, and you click its ears and it like starts snoring. Then there's like another one that like opens its mouth, and then another one is like one of those little spider monkeys. And I just remember like after the loss of my dad, I brought those everywhere. When we went back to his hometown, Louisville, Mississippi, to spend time with my grandma on that side of my family, I brought those with me. And I just remember looking at them and touching them. And like to this day, I still have them and I still love them. And it's just important because it's almost like they're still there. It just brings you so much joy to know all of the fun memories you had with those items.
So when you were at your camp this summer, that's a huge dream that you fulfilled. Did you feel that connection to your dad there? Did you feel the pride?
Definitely. I think so many people, like all of his friends from that still live in Memphis, like they text me and tell me how proud he would be of me and how I'm just like him. And I think definitely like I felt his presence and I knew just how proud he would be of me. Even though this wasn't ideal, I took lemons and made lemonade. So I think he would be so proud. And just to see those kids kind of do the same, have objects that just remind them of their loved one and tell me all of these stories was just so amazing. I think like being able to relate to people who kind of experience the same thing as you is also so important. I think like even to this day, sometimes I talk to people and I'm just like, you don't get my life. You don't get what I went through. You don't get my trauma. But going to places like Camp Good Grief or my camp, Lemons Lemonade Camp, it's one of the most important things is just connecting with people who have experienced what you have, because you're just like, oh my gosh, wait, I feel that way too. Like, I'm so glad that's normal.
That shared experience is so important, even though all of our experiences are unique to us as individuals, but sharing that, in a community of grievers. And it sounds like you felt that at the camp this summer too, and that the kids felt that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Like a lot of children lost siblings, and for all of them to just kind of talk about their siblings or their grandpa. There are actually two cousins that had recently lost their grandpa, and they were telling me how they used to go visit him in Mexico, and he would bring them special bakery treats and just like all the fun that they used to have. And for them to talk to me about that, I just felt so good because I know how hard that is, and for them to feel strong enough to open up to me is just so sweet because, I shared my experiences with them and so did my partner Avery. And then it was just amazing to see all of them come out of their shell and open up to us.
What was that like, sharing your story there with a group of younger children who you knew were looking up to you?
Yeah, going into the camp, I was a little bit scared. I'm not going to lie. I
Sure.
didn't know how things were going to go. But, I just knew that I had to own it and be myself and sharing my story to them. They listened and they wanted to understand and listen to my story. And then, they were like, oh my gosh, yeah, I feel that too. I have anxiety too. I lost my dad too. There was a girl who came to my camp, and she was a little bit older, and she kind of looked at me when she got there like, why am I at grief camp? I don't want to be here. But when we started talking about it, she was like, yeah, I lost my dad too. And we actually did the goodbye balloons like you do at Camp Good Grief. And her mom's actually a therapist. So when we were releasing the balloons and decorating them, she was like, oh my gosh, my mom does this with, a group of widowed wives. And I was like, that's so amazing. And anywho, it's just so amazing for all these kids to open up and listen to my experiences, and then for them eventually to share their own experiences, and just embracing them and recognizing that they're normal and it's going to be okay.
That's a big part to me with the work that we do through Camp Good Grief is when kids and teens are ready to give back. That's what I was saying at the beginning. I love, spending time with those of you that are former campers and clients. But when they're ready to give back and come back and be a volunteer and to pass on that experience to another child, it's so powerful. The kids look up to the former campers so much. And we call it, paying it forward, sharing your grief experience with another child. And it's also another way of memorializing your loved one, sharing, because nobody wants to come to Camp Good Grief. We've said that, or Lemons to Lemonade. And we also don't want anyone to come, but we know that that's not the reality. And we know that grief is better shared. And we have to help, especially children, have that right space to share, and that camp environment is so helpful to them. And so I love the paying it forward aspect, because it's a really important part of healing grief is, well, what do I do with this? How do I carry this with me, but how do I make meaning with it? And the meaning is in paying it forward sometimes. And that's what you have found, it sounds like, through writing your journal, starting the camp. It continues to help you find meaning and make meaning in a tragedy.
Yeah, just as I just remember feeling so alone and just kind of like I was in an endless dark room with no one around me, because I didn't know anyone who their dad had died at 5 years old. I would hope I wouldn't know anyone. I wouldn't wish this upon anyone. And just to be surrounded by people who have shared experiences for me and for so many kids that I've worked with is just so life-changing for them. And it's just so important. And it really is just so beautiful to see that.
How do you see your grief continuing to move with you into your future beyond 15?
Yeah, I obviously, like I said, grief is an endless journey, and as I get older, I'm always going to remember my dad and cherish all of his items and think about him and continue to make him proud, and exceed his expectations for me. But also I want to carry on his legacy throughout Lemons to Lemonade. I wish to expand the camp and continue it just like you guys have for Camp Good Grief. And, I just hope to reach as many kids as possible. And just sharing my grief with others is how I kind of plan my future.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Oh boy. Okay. In 5 years, I'll be in college. So hopefully I'll get into a great college. I'm a good student. I like to study. I like to work hard. And, hopefully Lemons Lemonade will have expanded. We just applied to a grant to receive a 501c3 in order to receive more donations from organizations and individuals. So yeah, I just want to continue my dad's legacy, continue Lemons to Lemonade, and strive to give myself the best opportunities.
Do you have a career path you're interested in?
I change my mind sometimes,
As
but
you should.
right now, like for the past year, I'm interested in law, so that's kind of where I'm targeting because I really like to write, and I am quite good at arguing. I prove my points pretty good. So that's kind of where I'm shooting. And I don't know, maybe in 5 years I'll be in law school. We'll see.
We'll see. I like that. What do you think? So let's think about when we started talking, hopefully educators and parents are listening to this, to just really understand childhood grief. Sometimes I feel like I can talk about it till I'm blue in the face, but they need to hear it from other children and teens. What do you think is kind of, the most important, or a couple of things that are the most important for them to know about children's grief?
Right. I think the last thing that as I mentioned earlier, would be to ignore it. That is probably that's the last thing I would do. I mean, it's gonna, carry on through their life and they just can't ignore it, and it's not healthy to ignore it. So obviously don't stab at it and, overdo it, but, just checking in with them and just kind of ensuring them that you're there for them and you understand what's going on and you want to do everything that you can possible to assist them through, their grief journey. I think something else that is super important, is to, make sure you have an understanding of grief. It's hard to explain, but grief is a challenging process and everybody's is unique, and it's very important to understand that grief is unique. Your grief journey is going to be completely different than your child's grief journey or your friend's grief journey. It's going to be different for everyone. So the biggest thing you can do is just to, make sure that you're there for them and let them know that you're there for them. That's a huge thing.
One thing you and I worked on, this is 10 years ago, was the holidays and grieving at the holidays. And we did some specific things about how to bring your dad to the table at the holidays. Those things that we work on are so important. That goes back to that continued bonds we were talking about. And what you've been saying all along is that, our loved ones are always with us. We have to learn, and this is the hard part of grief, is going from that physical presence to more of a spiritual presence and a connection. How would you say you've continued over the years to bring your dad to the table for special days and events?
Right. So obviously those days are so hard because those days are meant for family and love, and surround yourself with the people you love the most. And not having my dad there, who is someone I love more than anything in the world, it's hard. But, ever since I was little, my grandma embroiders the entire family's stockings. They're really beautiful, and he has one. So we still hang it at the fireplace every year. And when I was really little, I wrote letters and I used to draw pictures and I would put them in the stocking, and I still read them every year. They're so sweet. And my mom used to take photos of them and send them to all of her friends. But that was a big thing for me. I felt like I was just shooting it down a hatch to him in his stocking. My mom also, was her idea. I'm spoiled. My mom fills it every year with stuff that he would like, and just for me to see, because it's just sweet, because I know he was such a silly and goofy person, and just to see stuff that he would enjoy or take a giggle at is just, reminds me that he's there, and just to keep living, carry on his funny and sweet legacy.
That's really incredible to hear because that stocking was so important to you at 5 years old. And I remember that. I can remember you and I in that room, I know which room, had many conversations about that stocking, and you wanted that stocking out, and that stocking was very meaningful to you. And you said one day, and you tell my mom, I want that stocking out. And so to hear this many years later that is still a way that you connect, especially on special days. And I think that's important for listeners to hear that 10 years later, your dad's stocking is still out. You know, there are no rules. What works for one person may not work for someone else, but we have to try. And I think if we think about it in the sense that we are continuing our connection, we're maintaining our connection, we're merging the connection, we're not getting to a point of ending. I think that's what every griever needs to know.
Yeah, I would agree. It's never going to end, but around the holidays, if there's objects that remind you of your loved one, don't hesitate to put them out, because I feel like you can really feel their presence, and that was so helpful for me, and I hope that it can help more people. Even like setting a place at the dinner table is fun too. I've done that before, so.
That's good. What do you think as we wrap up? Anything that what do you feel like we've left out, or something that's really meaningful or important that you wanted to express today?
I think we've covered a lot of great information, but just something so important that I want everyone to know is grief is a lifelong process. It's never going to end, but it's daunting at first, but don't be scared, because if you're embracing the grief and allowing yourself to grieve, know that it's normal. Allow yourself to grieve. It's going to be okay. And if you just surround yourself with people who love you and care about you, you're going to be just fine.
And that from an expert 5-year-old griever to now 15-year-old griever who has done great grief work, great mourning work, continues to do great grief work. And that's how we know that it's great, because you understand that it is a continued journey. And I'm just so proud of you for putting it into action and sharing it with others in your community. We certainly believe there should be a Camp Good Grief in every community, because grief is the most universal experience. So I'm so proud of you for sharing yourself so much with so many people, sharing your dad, sharing your grief through the journal that you can get on Amazon, through your camp. And I just think that there are so many other incredible things coming your way because of your heart, your kindness, and your ability to face grief openly. So thank you for sharing some of that here with us today.
Thank you so much. I've just been so inspired by Camp Good Grief and everything that you guys have done for me. I truly believe that you changed my life, and I would have never written this workbook without meeting you guys. And, I encourage people to reach out to you, because everything that you guys do is just so helpful and amazing. So thank you so much for everything you've done for me and everything you continue to do and serving those who are experiencing grief, especially the youth, because I feel that the youth is ignored when it comes to grief, and they grieve too.
Absolutely. And maybe we'll even get you back here with us next summer to Camp Good Grief. That would be amazing. So that's my next thing I'm going to work on with you, because we would love to have you back. So thank you for today, and thank you for all you're doing for so many people, especially yourself.
I would love that. Thank you so much. It was so nice talking and catching up and just sharing all the fun memories. And I hope that people can take this and understand that they're going to be okay.
Grief does heal. Let me say that again. Grief does heal. But like we've said, grief demands attention and care. It also needs support and patience. Remember that your grief is a reflection of your love. You are not alone. The world is full of many grievers like you. You can learn more about us at www.baptistgriefcenters.org. You can check out our YouTube channel, Baptist Centers for Good Grief. You can check out our podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also, know that you can reach out and let us know if there's a topic that you're interested in learning more about. You're welcome to email me at angela.kelly@bmhcc.org. That's ANGELA.KELLY at bmhcc.org. And remember, grief is real, big, better shared. We'll talk soon.